Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Don't you just smile when you hear that song? I'm Lynn Krasker-Schultz. I'm the Director of Public Programming at the Vilna Shul, and we are thrilled to welcome you along with JArts and the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center to this incredible program. We had almost 1,000 people registered, and we are thrilled to present to you Chef Michael Leviton. The Vilna is a Jewish cultural center located in the heart of Beacon Hill. We focus on bringing people together using Jewish arts and culture in our 100-year-old historic former synagogue building. The Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center is a destination for exploring and preserving the history of Jewish families and institutions in New England and beyond. The JHC is an archive, educational center, and family history resource located at the New England Historical Genealogical Society on Newbury Street. And JArts brings together people to explore and celebrate the diverse world of Jewish art, culture, and creative expression. So, before we jump into the program tonight, this is how it's going to work. In just a moment, Stephanie Call, Associate Director of the Archives and Education at the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center, will give us some background and historical context for the foods we're about to talk about. From there, Laura Mandel, Executive Director of JArts, will be in conversation with Chef Michael Leviton. We will then have some time for audience Q&A. If you have a question at any point during the discussion, please type it into the Q&A box. If you have comments, thoughts, stories, feelings, please type those into the chat box. We hope that you will share some of your thoughts with us through the chat. We'll also be pasting a program survey into the chat box and would love to know what you think of this program. Please take a moment after the program to complete it. And now, without further ado, I'm turning the microphone over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with our friends from JArts and the Vilna Shul, and excited to see what Michael does with these historic recipes from the Jewish Heritage Center archives, where I'm talking to all of you from in the background. Although our collection of recipes and cookbooks is small, we're looking to expand it. So please let me know if you have materials you wish to donate, and I'll put my contact information in the chat box for anyone interested in learning more. And I do have a timeline for people to look at. And hopefully that will be brought up in just a minute. But to put our small collection of Jewish cookbooks and family recipes into context, I've put together this timeline of the Boston Jewish community beginning in 1649 with the brief sojourn of Sephardic trader Solomon Franco to 1941 when the Wolfner family arrives in Boston. Two of Annie Steiner Wolfner's recipes will be showcased by Michael this evening. And a disclaimer, of course, is that this in no way is the entire history of the Boston Jewish community. So please view this as a picture painted with very broad brushstrokes. The Boston Jewish community is a late blooming community, and it didn't really start to coalesce until the founding of Congregation Ohabe Shalom in 1842 and Temple Israel in 1854. The advent of these two synagogues, which are both still active today, created a foundation for the Jewish community. In 1840, there were only about 40 to 100 Jews living in Boston. And on the eve of the Civil War, that number only grew to about 1,000. So not a tremendous increase, considering that the Jewish population in New York City grew from 7,000 to 40,000 during that 21-year period. However, the Jewish population of Boston grows exponentially, as you can see, during the Eastern European Jewish immigration wave from 1880 to 1924. So we see that in 1895, there are 20,000 Jews in Boston. That climbs to 80,000 in 1920 and up to 115,000 in 1935. And it's also during that late 19th and early 20th century time period, the institutions that make up the Boston Jewish community's history also begin to flourish. The Vilna Shul, Federated Jewish Charities, which we now know as Combined Jewish Philanthropies, Beth Israel Hospital, the Bureau of Jewish Education, and Hebrew Teachers College are all founded between 1888 and 1923. So as you can see, this is a long period of institutional growth as well. The early to mid 20th century is also the timeline for the recipes you'll see tonight, which are from two different sources. The first is from the Universal Cookbook, a collection of tried and tested home receipts published by the Boston section of the National Council of Jewish Women in 1909. And this was at a time when community organizations heavily invested in philanthropy to support the social services needed for newly arrived Jewish immigrants. This is a great example of a cookbook that was created and published for fundraising purposes. And we've seen a lot of those throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Founded in Chicago in 1893, the National Council of Jewish Women embraced the idea of being American without giving up their Jewish identity. And the recipes in the cookbook illustrate this concept, ranging from Boston brown bread to matzahs dipped in eggs and milk, as well as a recipe for New York Passover cake. And I'm not sure what the difference is between New York Passover cake and another city's Passover cake. The remaining 2 recipes come from a collection of family papers donated to the JHC, the Jews of Takao, which chronicles the lives of 4 families from the city of Takao in what is now the Czech Republic. Annie Steiner was born in Takao in 1912 and married Alfred Wolfner in 1932. The couple moved to France, where their 2 children were born, and in 1941 arrived in the US, settling in Brookline, Massachusetts. Written in German, the recipes in Annie's cookbook were either her own or passed down from family members in the Takao area. Sharing recipes is an activity that this family still enjoys. According to Annie's daughter Beatrice, at a recent virtual gathering with family, it revolved around sharing recipes for the same favorite cookie, and everyone had a variation on the recipe that was particular to their household. This anecdote really highlights the importance of recipes in helping to form our understanding of Jewish history. Whether it's hyperlocal or within the context of national or world history, these recipes bring us closer to not just understanding, but actively connecting to our past. And I'll now turn things over to Laura. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was a perfect bit of Jewish history about Boston because that gives the perfect context to this program tonight. So tonight's program came to be because within the JArts Collaborative, we have a group called the Food Think Tank. And a few years ago, they decided that we wanted to think about how we could better explore the Jewish culture of Boston and history, which is so rich, but through food and through the kitchens that have produced these smells and tastes that really make us think of the community. And so when we started this a few years ago, we did a session about the delis of Brookline and Boston. And through the motion of those delis, you can really see the history of the motion of the Jewish community. And thinking about the success of that program and how interested many of us were in this issue of how we can think about history best through food, Stephanie approached me and said, I have this archive of recipes. And we said, this sounds like such a fun opportunity. Meanwhile, Chef Michael Leviton, who's so lovely to be with us tonight, and I had gone to Israel together a few years ago. And as he'll tell you also, we had a lot of conversations about how the real secrets to food and to cooking and to the nostalgia you feel from those is really about the history and the grandmas and the family stories behind them. And so we said, great, let's all get together and sort of think about these old recipes that are in this archive, to think about what they meant back then and what they can mean to us today. So today, like I said, we are with Chef Michael Leviton, who you may know for his former restaurant Lumiere in Newton. He was a co-owner of Area 4, the most delicious pizza place in Cambridge. And most recently, he is a restaurant consultant who's been doing a lot of really important with Massachusetts Restaurants United around COVID and the issues restaurants have been facing. So we are so lucky to be with him right now. He is going to take us through a few recipes that help illustrate this collection that Stephanie just mentioned. And as Lynn said, if you have questions while he's talking, please put them in the Q&A and we'll try to raise them as well. So Michael, what are we cooking?
Great, thanks, Laura. It's a thrill to be here. So it was really fantastic to look through the archive and look at all of these recipes. And you know, what we're going to cook tonight is we're going to do sweet and sour carrots, Kremsel, which some of you may know as Kremsel, and then tongue in mustard sauce. And you know, in looking through the archive, it just I think the most striking thing is that these recipes are not recipes as we would understand them today. They are very basic guidelines that presuppose someone who spends an awful lot of time in the kitchen. And, today we try and do everything so rigid so that, somebody can't make a mistake. But here, when you were cooking over an oven that you probably had to either stoke with wood or coal, and there was no temperature, there was no way to really control temperature other than your knowledge of that particular material. And there's no measurements here, or very minimal. And what I was trying to get at and have found fascinating, especially after the trip to Israel, is that notion of, these are flavors and tastes and dishes that if we don't work really hard to preserve them now, we're going to lose. And we're not just going to lose the recipe, but we're going to lose an actual, I don't know what these are supposed to taste like, right? It's been generations since a lot of these things have been made, probably, and we've lost that. So the question is, how do we, you can preserve an image through a picture, you can make an audio recording, right? But you can't preserve a taste. That is like an oral history. It just has to get passed down. And just as with an oral history, it's going to undergo changes with each retelling or recooking. And so it's fascinating to me to try and figure out what should this have tasted like, or what did it taste like? And let's also remember that the ingredients are drastically different, right? Even to the point of, I was having a conversation with my parents last night and talking about how difficult it is to translate these recipes. And my mom made the point that, someone told her that, an egg 50 or 100 years ago was a lot smaller than an egg now, which actually, learning that last night was really helpful. The Kremsel recipe is a lot better today than it was yesterday. But there's a lot of trial and error, and I can try and, based on these things, make something that I think tastes good, but I have no idea as to the extent of the authenticity. And that's both really intriguing and challenging, and it's also quite infuriating that I don't know. I don't have a comparison figure. So I think that, that's really the fun thing and the difficult thing. And so while I have managed to put together recipes that I think taste good, I don't know that I make no claims at authenticity. And I will say that the Kremsels are not my favorite thing. I went and looked, first of all, even the spelling was different, but if you Google Kremsels, you will come up with absolutely nothing, which I found intriguing in and of itself that we stumped Google.
There's one thing you may find. The only person that we have found in the last, 20, 30 years of being on the internet who posted it is Joe Nathan in one place, and that's one
Kremsel
variation.
Kremsel. No, Kremsel you can find, and that's—
You're right.
Right, it's Kremsel. It's the spelling's different, so Kremsel, there's a lot of recipes, and that's sort of a matzah pancake with prunes, which, the prunes is a great addition if you're going to be eating a lot of matzah for the obvious reasons. But this one was more like a baked dumpling. And so I don't know, we'll see. You guys make it, tell me what you think later. With that in mind, the carrots are the most 21st century dish that we've got. Basically, all I've really done here is to cut up some carrots. The recipe called for dice, but I like the oblique cut a little better. That's the chef in me coming out. The one thing I will say about can we post the carrot recipe for a second for folks to see, just to get a sense of what I'm working with here? Now, I don't know if you can read all of it, but basically the big things to take away are cover them with water and cook them for half an hour. And then drain them, and then put some stuff in and cook them for another 15 minutes. So all I could think of was, okay, we have sweet and sour carrot mush. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to back away from that. And I'm not a real fan of cooking carrots in water. You're basically diluting flavor rather than adding flavor. So the way I twisted this was I wanted to roast the carrots at a relatively low temperature. This helps to concentrate the flavors, make them taste even sweeter, even more carroty. So with that in mind, the carrots, a little olive oil, but schmaltz would be good too. Some salt and some freshly ground pepper, and toss that around, and that goes on my sheet pan. I did so many iterations of recipes, both with the carrots and the Kremsels and some other stuff in the past few days, that I'm completely out of parchment paper. So aluminum foil will have to do. 35 minutes at 350, and they come out, and I'll do the Julia Child Through the Magic of Television. They come out looking like this, a little wrinkled, but concentrated, but really super flavorful, way more carroty than when they went in. And then where the original recipe suggested some flour, sugar, I think some butter, and yeah, the flour was the one that I didn't want to do, because that's going to make it heavy, and you don't really need that for glazing carrots, and that's essentially what we're doing. So
sorry, Michael, can you remind us what temperature and how long?
350, 35 minutes.
Great, 350, 35 minutes. I will put that in the chat in case anybody would like to see that.
Well, and we're gonna send all the recipes out after this, but they should all give you a much better indication, or not indication, a better they're a better recipe than what's there in terms of walking you through or holding your hand through the process. Okay, some golden raisins, which I've soaked in boiling water for about 10 minutes. You can also just put them in a little water and throw in the microwave for a minute or so. I also have some sugar and some cider vinegar. And all of that goes on the stove. And I'm just going to let that cook to kind of glaze. And as it gets a little syrupy, right towards the end, I'm going to add a couple of tablespoons of butter to round it out, give it that wonderful glazed, buttery experience. But it's pretty much a dead easy recipe, right? While we're doing that, we're gonna let's start on our Kremsels. Can we put that recipe up for just a sec, please? There we go. Okay, just get a load of this. I love this recipe, right? 5 matzahs, heaping tablespoons of goose fat, quite a bit of sugar, a touch of cinnamon, some grated almonds, right? And then the filling, you know, also not particularly detailed, right? And then we just mix everything together. And I love this, that after you've put 3 heaping tablespoons of goose fat in there, it shouldn't be too heavy a dough, right? I don't know, I find that hilarious. Form the dumplings, fill them, and bake in very well greased forms. But then it says, no, the cookie sheet is better. So, all right, didn't give me a lot to go with. And since I'd never had Kremsel either, you know, I felt like I was really, you know, walking around in the dark. So I had to take a look at Joan Nathan's recipe for this to understand a little bit of what it might be. And so And what's interesting is that there are a number of different recipes that basically say soak the matzah first, squeeze it out like if you were making matzah bread. This definitively didn't say that, so I didn't want to do that, even though it kind of made sense to me. So all I'm going to do now is to crush the matzah sort of as finely as I can by hand, because we didn't have a food processor 100 years ago. And so let me do that, and then I'll walk you through the next little piece. I apologize for the crunching noise.
While Michael is crunching, I just want to let everyone know, since I see some chatting about this, that he removed the flour from the carrot recipe to make it kosher for Passover, and he put the butter in. But if anybody is worried about kashrut, you of course can use margarine or otherwise.
Schmaltz.
Schmaltz. Perfect.
More schmaltz. Or the goose fat that you're gonna, because if you render the fat from a goose, you're gonna have a lot more than the 3 heaping tablespoons for the Kremsel. Okay, so as this thing gets nice and fine, and you could sort of do this all day, I toyed with the idea of maybe pulsing half in the food processor and then doing half by hand, but that did seem to be a little too complex. The other thing that I love about this recipe is that it called for not just whole eggs, but also cooked egg yolks, which still kind of puzzles me. I just find that fascinating, especially if you want to keep it nice and light. But now that we've crushed this up, I'm going to walk over here, grab a whole bunch of stuff. So nothing like a little goose fat. Actually, this is duck fat that I just happen to have lying around in the fridge.
And for the person who just asked that, someone actually just asked, can you use duck fat instead of goose fat? So there's your answer.
Yeah, because I don't. It's not like I have a goose running around that pack.
Do you have a duck?
Actually, in the pond, yes. It would be great if I could render wild turkey fat, but we're not allowed to do that. So that. Some egg yolk. Basically, you just mix everything and hope for the best. The sieved or grated egg yolk. I will say that the technique of steaming your hard-boiled eggs for about 13 minutes is the best technique for hard-boiling eggs. It just works every time. My beaten eggs, the recipe before was, I think, 6 eggs and 5 yolks. It's actually, now I've cut that back to 4 and 4, and it seems to work a lot better. I have sugar, salt, cinnamon. Those are going in as well. Lemon zest from the microplane. We'll hold that for a second. And some sliced natural almonds that I lightly toasted, and I'm just going to crush those up as well.
And there is a question, can you use matzah meal or matzah farfel?
Maybe. I don't know. Try it. Let me know how it comes out.
There we go.
Okay. So now what we've got here, sorry, we're going to pop back for a second, but I don't know how well you can see, but the liquid's basically evaporated. It's got a nice shine from the sugar and vinegar. And if you could smell it, you'd get that little punch of vinegar up your nose. And now I'm just going to add the butter. And give that just a second to kind of incorporate. Ah, yes, there we go. So nicely glazed. The richness of the butter cuts the acidity. You've got sweet and sour carrots. Maybe a little bit of chive or scallion or parsley would be really nice on this, but a dead easy dish. And if you didn't want to add the additional fat, I think just cut down the amount of vinegar a little bit and maybe adjust with just a titch of water. But the idea is just to get this all nice and glazed. Let me see how I did.
Okay, since this is the oral history of food, you have to describe. Is it good?
Yeah, that's really good. That I already knew how to make, right? I knew how to make sweet and sour carrots. So I just, that was easy. So everything that's in there. So I will tell you that I made a number of different iterations of the Kremsels, and until I adjusted until I put some water in there and decreased the amount of egg, and I think specifically the yolk a little bit. These things were heavy. I remember in the late 80s and early 90s in San Francisco eating these, they had the, oat cakes were a big thing, right? And they had this the early iterations of this had that sort of heavy, dense oat cake-like texture. And I got to tell you, I didn't love it. But taking a step back and lightening the amount of egg, and then I do add some water, and that really turned out to be the big move. So now we're just going to mix all of this up, and the thing here, right, is to really give this mixture about 10 minutes or so to stand once it's all mixed really well, so that the matzah has time to absorb some of this liquid. And the water, I added the water as a measured amount because, when you tell someone to soak the matzah and squeeze it out, to me that's it's really imprecise. How long do you soak it? You define, right? Is it like completely? Does it end up coming out like Wonder Bread soft, or is it just barely soaked? So, but that was clearly what was needed to lighten this. And so I'm going to go on record as saying I believe that that's what this woman would have done with this, which she would have wet them a little bit. But in order to control that, I think it's a quarter cup. I don't have the recipe in front of me at the moment, but I think I added a quarter or a half a cup of water, which allows me to, at least I feel, better control the moisture content more precisely.
It's also easier to control dry matzah than wet matzah. So that seems like a really good idea.
All right, so we're going to pretend that this has stood for 10 minutes, and I'm just going to move it right there for a second. So I have over here what I know as a silpat or silicone baking mat. And the idea here, let me pull over mine. I've also got she calls for pitted cooked plums. I'm going to assume that meant prunes. And so what I did is I took a recipe that I had for a dried fruit and maple compote that we used to serve at Lumiere. And I just took all the other dried fruit out and did it with straight prunes, but it's, and I'll send the recipe along, but it is maple, white wine, and lemon, basically, with a little touch of vanilla. And you just kind of steep the chopped prunes in that. It's really awesome. Great on labneh. So we're just going to take little dollops of this and make a little well with your finger. I don't know if you can see that.
Looks great.
Right. And then a little bit of prune. Helps the matzah go down. And then a little bit more of this on top, just enough to kind of hide the prunes.
Do you think that prune filling would also work in Hamentaschen?
Yes, very well.
Great.
And I will say that I cooked a lot of Hamentaschen this year. I think I've got a recipe. If someone reminds me, I'll share that. But that after a number of different batches by a number of different people, again, I had to take an existing recipe and play with it a while. But I've got a nice Hamentaschen recipe for you as well.
I myself would like that. So I promise all of you out there that will send that along. And I'm asking about the prunes because my dad will be delighted to have prune Hamentaschen. So perfect.
Man after my own heart. And then these, after you've done all of this, these go in the oven for 25 minutes at 350. And I basically just wanted to try and figure out how to do everything at 350, because figuring that would, as much as anything else, would sort of qualify as a medium oven. And didn't want to have to mess around with a number of different temperatures like the woman who wrote these recipes would have to. So after 25 minutes and a little cooling period, what we have are these. And they look sort of like little oat cakes. But this iteration is a lot lighter. And the prune filling inside. It's really, they're actually pretty good. Still not my favorite, but I will try now Joan Nathan's Kremsel recipe, because that to me seems a little tastier. And I definitely trust, having cooked with Joan a number of times, I definitely trust her palate. Yeah, so Kremels.
Nice.
Yeah.
Something totally new to most of us. Although I do see in the chat that somebody's father loved them. How cool.
Right? That is very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Kremels or Kremsel. So when I was talking to my folks last night, my dad kind of remembered it as a, not as a pancake, but as a baked sort of dumpling-like thing. Whether this is what was intended, your guess is as good as mine. I need someone who's 80 something or so to tell me if I'm even remotely close. Okay, so mustard tongue. So I have a perhaps unnatural love affair with tongue, and I don't know. It's probably because of a bunch of different reasons. Oh, so sorry, they just posted the Kremel recipe. So one thing that I did on the initial iteration, and it works very well, is just you can dice some apples. She says slice, but if you dice some apple and mix that in, it steams nicely in there. I would definitely try and find a baking apple, so that one that's going to retain some texture. But prune and apple work very nice as well. Okay, for the tongue recipe. So my tongue confession. 1, I love tongue. 2, one of my first kitchen jobs was washing dishes at Barry's Deli in Woburn. And the first real bit of food they let me touch was beef tongue. And it became my job to peel the tongues as they were boiling hot coming out of this giant stock pot. And God, I hated it. It was awful. But between that and developing a taste for it over the years, and especially when I lived in New York, going to Katz's Deli and 2nd Avenue and getting tongue and eggs or a corned beef tongue sandwich, and then also when I lived in San Francisco, discovering lengua, or how the Mexicans would cook tongue. And so lengua tacos became a huge favorite of mine. So in all its different guises, I happen to love tongue. And the fact that it grosses people out makes it that much more appealing. The other thing is that, and this ties into the whole grandma thing, but when I teach at Boston University, I always tell the kids that, you know, when you're cooking for me, I don't care about Instagram. I want you to, all I care about is how it tastes, right? If you have chosen your food properly and seasoned it well and used the right technique and put it on a plate neatly, it will, the food will have enough inherent beauty in and of itself that it doesn't need any garnish, it doesn't need any adornment, it's just going to be awesome. And to me, that's, you know, that's grandma. The other thing is grandma cooked because she loves you so much. Your grandmother loved you to death, and that's why she fed you, and that's what she wanted you to feel. Now, unfortunately, neither of my grandmothers were good cooks, but I definitely felt the love when my paternal grandmother cooked for me, even though it was not great. I definitely felt like she wanted to do something so much for me and my sister. So that I want that experience. Now, the other thing about grandma is, or about this notion of the, I have this notion of the prototypical provincial grandmother, right? Grandma didn't have a lot. We didn't have, you know, the whole notion of cucina povera, or poverty cuisine, right? Anyone can be a great, can be seen as a great chef. Anyone can be a hero with foie gras and truffles. However, if you can make tongue and carrots and Kremsel, if you can make that stuff sing, then that to me shows that you're a great cook, right? So whether it's brisket or tongue, or, you know, beef cheeks is another one I love. All of those things that, when Laura and I were in Israel, the Yemenite beef shank soup is, to this day, one of the best things I've ever put in my mouth. Unbelievable. It's a calf's foot with some spices, and it's otherworldly in how good it is, right? That to me, that guy's a chef, right? I just make, you know, I make stuff. That guy's a chef. He Rumpelstiltskined it, right? He turned straw into culinary gold. That to me is the exciting thing about cooking. Things like tongue and sweetbreads and kidneys and liver and all of these other things that nobody wants to eat. Like, if you can make that delicious, you're a cook. So, tongue. I'm sorry if I gross anybody out, right? That's your problem, not mine. So, I've had this
They
tongue.
signed up to be here. It's okay.
Yeah, right? And even if you didn't, right? So, her recipe, again, if we can pop that one up for a second. I love this, right? Okay, so onions 3, cut into slices. That's easy, right? I did that. Roast the onions. Now, actually, I went and tried to Google translate some of that recipe, and it's not roast the onions. The German tells you it has to do with rust. So make something rust colored. So to me, that meant not roasting the onions per se, because roasting would be, to me, would be toss the onions with a little fat, put them on a sheet pan and throw them in the oven, right? They're gonna get all dry, and I don't think that's what she meant. So I think she meant rust colored. And so what I did is I actually cooked these on top of the stove very slowly. First they sweat, and then as they continue to sweat and those sugars get released, you get caramelized. So this is, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is what she meant. So I have some lightly caramelized onions, no sugar in there. The caramelized is a euphemism for really well cooked and letting them brown naturally. So I've done that. Then she also calls for cooking the tongue in some water, I think, or it doesn't even say that. Anyway, so my French training says, oh, no, you have to cook it in a flavorful liquid. So I've cooked it in some stock with some additional vegetables. I've since taken the vegetables out, but we have the tongue here, and it's very well cooked, right? It's been sitting in there. And so now what I'm going to do is to very gently, can you guys see that? I'm going to peel this.
In all its glory. Yep, we see it.
Yeah, baby.
You know, for my mother who is out there, I will just say I know she loves this because my parents love making tongue, and I am in the camp of I really don't enjoy looking at it, but I will enjoy eating it on the other end.
Right. So, you know, I'm just going to peel this. It would be a little better if I'd gotten it a little hotter, but I wanted to be able to just get right at it.
Michael, where do you buy a tongue?
I actually bought it through a distributor, but what I would do, the two places that sort of, well, I would think that you could go to an ethnic market. And so I would say I know that H Mart might have it, Super 88. I would also look, you know, in somewhere like Maverick Square in Eastie. I would also, if you're very concerned about the provenance of this tongue, as I am, I would go to, I would either call MF Duloc Meats in Somerville and say, hey, I need a beef tongue. And they'll have a locally raised, properly raised, pastured animal beef tongue for you. You could also try calling Walden Local Meats in the South End. Those two would be my first choices as to where to source one. You know, so I'm a little wary of sorry, one second. A little wary of the provenance of some of the other animals. So, and then we're just going to slice this up, right? All we're really trying to do is, you know, cut slices of the tongue. There are people who get a little grossed out by the back end. It gets a little softer. I happen to think it's all part of the experience. The other thing I will say about cooking the tongue in stock, if you look at her sauce recipe, there's really not much to it. You know, make the gravy with a little bit of mustard, vinegar, sugar, touch of flour, and some water. Right. It strikes me as, you know, now you've got this highly flavored tongue cooking liquid. That should be the basis for our sauce. Right. So what I went ahead and did to try and rework this a little bit is what I discovered. And the other intriguing thing here was with this notion of mustard. Right. I don't know if she meant like Dijon mustard or mustard powder. If you did straight mustard powder, this thing's going to be super strong. So that would be the next thing I would try. But she actually, now that I think about it, because of all the sugar and the vinegar she wants you to add to it, she might actually have meant mustard powder. That said, I went with Dijon. So roughly equal parts Dijon and cooking liquid. And then for every 1 part of the stock, half that again as sugar. So 1 part, 1 part, 1/2 part. And the big move here is doing what we would call a liaison, right? If you just mix the mustard and the stock, it's not going to fully smoothly incorporate. So what you've got to do is I'm going to first heat the stock a little bit. You get that hot, and then I'm going to whisk that into the mustard.
And just while you're doing that, Michael, a couple people have asked about where to buy a kosher tongue. I am 99% sure you can get one at the butchery in Brookline, and if you can't get one, you can probably call them and order one.
That's there. Going to give this a second. So we're gently going to, and actually we can just do that as well. And if we're doing this at my house, or if I'm doing this in a restaurant, I am absolutely finishing this sauce with a little bit of butter, or maybe a touch of cream just to smooth it out, give it that, luxuriousness that comes from a little bit of butter fat. So, but if you're going for the kosher experience, that's not happening. So I'm going to mix in a little bit at a time.
While you're whisking that, there's also a question. For those out there who don't enjoy tongue so much, are there other cuts of beef or meat that you think this would be delicious with?
Well, look, there's a long tradition of meat and mustard sauce, so it's really just a question of, I think this would be great with a steak. I might use a richer, I would want to use a beefier stock, right? But yeah, this would be good with anything. And so now I'm just going to let that heat up a little bit. Then I just happen to have another beef tongue, which I already sliced and put in a nice little rosace, because that's what I do. All right, and then pour the sauce over the tongue. And this would then go in the oven, right, like that. If you had a cast iron, it might be cool to serve it right in that. Or you could, this would go in the oven and heat up, right? So that we would then have something that at the end of the day,
And Michael, people are wondering, how long did you cook the tongue for originally?
Oh, good question. So cooking the tongue, right? I don't really care what anybody else says about cooking tongue. If you're going to do it that way, right, what I would do is bring it to a boil, turn it down to the barest of simmers, and then cover it, making sure that the tongue stays submerged, right? And bare simmer about four to 4.5 hours, right? It takes a long time. You can get it done quicker, but it's not going to be as evenly and wonderfully cooked. And the other important thing is, once it's done or almost done, pull it out, peel it, and drop it back in the liquid, so that as it cools in the liquid, like a braise or a soup, right, it's reabsorbing all of that wonderful flavor, and it'll be a lot better. Okay.
It also sounds like this could be a good candidate for an Instant Pot.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, not too familiar with the technology.
I know. I will offend some of us out there, but I will say my Instant Pot is great for some things, and this seems like one of those.
Right. So this is what you would then sort of have. We imagine that this is all nice and hot. Oh, shoot. Well, we're going to pretend that there's a bed of onions underneath. Okay, just like that. Little bed of onions.
As you said, as long as it tastes good, it doesn't matter, right?
Right. Right. But again, look, I'm just putting it on the plate, right? No sprigs of rosemary, no roasted tomato powder or some mishigas like that. Oh, what's the one that I really hate? Olive oil powder, right? If you want to put olive oil on something, put olive oil on something. Why do you need to make it a powder? I don't understand. Anyway.
I always just think of you saying tweezer food, and this is the opposite of tweezer food.
Right. Grandma does not own a pair of tweezers. Or if she does, she doesn't use it in the kitchen.
Not for the kitchen.
Okay, so tongue with mustard sauce and roasted onions. Voila,
Gorgeous.
right? Again, little parsley, maybe some scallions, chives, something like that. But with our carrots and then our Kremsel for dessert, and I think we've got an okay Passover meal.
It sounds more than okay to me.
Yeah, it was. I can't emphasize enough the unique challenge that this represents to try and take these recipes that are, they're really. I mean, chefs, we tell people, the recipe is a guideline, right? Well, these really were guidelines at best, right? And there's not, if you'll see the recipes that we send out, and I've tried to give you a lot more detail to make sure that there's a lot less guesswork going on, right? Because this presupposes so much culinary knowledge that most of us don't have anymore, right? And so that's why the recipe has to be that much more precise. Otherwise, you as the home cook are going to go, I don't know, I followed the recipe exactly and it tasted like crap, right? That doesn't do anybody any good. If I can give you more detail, I will, and then there's less opportunity for screwing up. These old things, I think it's not just enough to sort of record, maybe not just enough to get a video of grandma, right? Because she's going to say, oh, a handful. How much? I don't know, a handful. We've got to really get those details from them before they're no longer with us, right? So happy Passover.
This is fantastic. And we do have one more question that I do want to ask you because I'm intrigued by this. So when Stephanie first went through the archives to find all these recipes, we had books and books and pages of choices. So how did you land on these 3 recipes specifically?
Well, let's work backwards. So the mustard tongue, the other meat recipe that really appealed to me were 2 brain recipes. And so I didn't think that those were going to go over real well. And it's frankly a little difficult to get brains these days, what with mad cow and everything. So that was off the table. And then, tongue, awesome. So that was an easy choice. The Kremsel, I don't know. I think the fact that I'd never heard of it and it was the recipe was just to me so intriguing in terms of like, take all these really heavy ingredients and make it a nice light batter, right? I don't know. That intrigued me. There's a lot of other real interesting stuff in there, and a lot of cool Passover stuff. There were some interesting non-challah bread recipes. And then there was a lot of stuff that just seemed, I don't know, it didn't seem to be so grandmothery, right, and unique in some way. So I think those are what, that's what stuck for me.
That's great. And I will also note that given all of the other recipes, given how many of you are out there right now interested in this, I think we've talked about making this into a longer series. So Michael will be back with more recipes in the future. Yeah, great. Yeah, no, send Stephanie all those old family sort of heirloom recipes, and I'd love to take a look at a bunch more of them and figure out what I can do with it. It's great. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to throw it back to Lynn to officially close us out.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. This was great. And we encourage everyone, if you are taking or making any of these recipes, which we will send out, please take pictures. Please send us your thoughts. We would love to hear about how they came out. Post on Facebook or Instagram, or just send us an email. We welcome them all. I want to thank JArts, and I want to thank the Wyner Family Center for this incredible program, and especially thank Michael for all of his hard work leading up to this event. I'm sure that you had many failed or not so great recipes that you tried out in order to get to the most successful ones that you presented today. So we appreciate that greatly. And a special thanks to Deca Luban for running all of the back-end tech and making this seamless and wonderful tonight. If you want to join us for any upcoming programs, we're going to paste a couple links in the chat box right now. The Vilna has a wonderful event coming up on March 24th that is harosets from around the world, and we will be making Turkish, Persian, and Ashkenazi harosets with Chef Daniel Heinrich. The Wyner Center is doing a program on the colonial era to present on April 6th with Dr. Michael Feldberg. We hope you will join us for that. And JArts is presenting their community fellows with a program on March 21st called Making Tangible the Intangible, Objects That Hold Memory, in relation to Passover. So we hope you will join us for all of these upcoming programs and many, many more. Visit all of our websites. And without further ado, we wish everyone a good evening and a wonderful Passover.